Well, I was a talk show guest. I was on most of the talk shows in this country. I had been on Geraldo, Sally, Jesse Raphael, those shows like that. And then when Jerry appeared, I was able to get on his show as a guest. And I was on the show actually 6 times before I was actually a producer. So my background, no one will ever be able to do that again. I went from guest to producer, which will never be done again. I don't think so. As I said, I'd been a guest 6 different times on the show, and then a month after the final time as a guest, they called me to be a guest finder because they wanted to find these street kids to do a story. My producer, Brenda Yu, said, "Hey, I think, Bud, Norm would be able to find people," which I did. So I found the people, and, Jerry came out there with his security, and they picked us up in a limo, and we didn't know what to expect. Al Bowman and I were like, "Yo, this is gonna be a fun time. You know, we're gonna be guest finders for Jerry Springer." We were paid a lot of money, as I recall, even like 500 to $1,000 just to find guests for the show. And the first thing we were told when we got in the limo with Jerry was him and his security said, "Where are the hookers? Where are the girls?" So we looked at each other and we're like, "Okay, we understand you want to get guests, but we also need to get you women as well." And that led us on the fast track to being producers because we were able to procure the guest and procure the women. So they had it was a double dip, as you like to say. And Jerry and his security enjoyed it immensely. Put it that way. Everything we did, they enjoyed. And they were coming out, I think every 2 or 3 weeks, they came out to LA to do more shows because of that. And then eventually they started having me bring the guest to Chicago. And that led to Al and I being freelance producers. We actually produced the shows ourselves. And then in the end, I was hired full time. And again, the 1 year I worked there full time was when the show went from number 10 to number one. It was like double duty. We had to find the guests and we had to find the women as well. So I basically was his. It's funny because we did stories with pimps, and I was Jerry's personal pimp. If I hadn't found those women that from beginning as a guest finder all the way through to when I worked there full time, I wouldn't have been there. So again, my job was more important to find him women than find him guests. The ratings were good, but what got me the job full time and kept me there was the fact that I was getting him women. And so that was really part of the deal. And again, for them to say, "Oh, there was a one-off," is the biggest joke. Every show I ever did, I had strippers on, and every show I ever did, Jerry was horn dogging on the strippers. The whole idea of the fake guest of Jerry Springer is a laugh because when I got there, they had already been doing fake guests and fake shows. They had been doing them for years. It's just they didn't rate very highly, so nobody cared. And when I left, they were still doing fake shows. And again, you'll see some stuff I'll provide in the book that shows how even after I was blamed for everything, they still kept on doing the fake shows. The difference was the fake shows that we did were the highest rated shows they ever did, and they were beating Oprah. So that's why it was such a big deal. But what we would do is in the beginning, sometimes we got actors, right? But we found out that the actors would overact. We had one show where the guy, I think he had been on some shows before, like that you'd actually see on regular TV, like maybe ER and things like that. But he was so obviously an actor that backstage, the lady that got me the job, Brenda Yu, she's like, "Tell your actor to give it up already." So we realized the actors had a tendency to overact. So what we ended up doing is just getting people from strip clubs, people that we knew. A lot of people were from rock bands because I had been in a band, and they were just wanting to go on TV and they would do whatever we told them to do. And if you watch some of my shows, they're fighting and they're throwing punches and they're hitting each other, but these weren't real. These were fake shows, but they were still hitting each other. And to this day, they still air some of my shows, even though I'm supposedly the guy that did all the fake shows. They still air some of my shows on Jerry Springer, and they show the highlights of them because they were such good shows. You wouldn't be able to tell they were fake because again, they were throwing punches and they were connecting, and the stories. I made sure that they looked real. When I got them to get to the studio, they had to know that you have to be this character the whole time. It wasn't just, you do on stage, you're there the whole time and you're that character. You don't get out of character. We send you back home to where you came from. So it was the whole idea of getting the people kind of pumped up on the whole thing. But again, I did real shows. I did some real shows as well as the fake shows. The problem with the real shows is that you had the emotion go along with it. We had one real show where they wanted to kill each other after the show. And I had to bring the security guy, Steve Wilkos, in, and he went ahead and warned everybody about, not having to go to jail if they try to kill each other. And so we calmed everything down. But obviously, as you saw from the documentary, there was one murder, but there was other murders and suicides they don't talk about. And that was the problem with the real stories, because it doesn't end at the show. It goes back when they go home and you got problems. But with the fake shows, it's all over. You don't have to worry about anybody killing each other. So the fake shows were actually the preferred method for Jerry Springer. And again, I wasn't the only guest who ever did it. I mean, the only producer that ever did the fake shows, but I brought it to such a higher level that the ratings were so much better that then the media wanted to know, hey, what's going on? When we were number 10, when I got hired, nobody cared the show was fake. But when we became number one, suddenly they're like, hey, Jerry Springer's fake. And because I was the number one guy, they all tried to pin it on me. Some of my former guests went on Jenny Jones, and they cooked up this whole scandal thing with the Jenny Jones people in the show Extra, as well as with 2020. And then there was another guest, a little scumbag, that what happened was we had warned the guest about the fact that 2020 was looking into the show. And this punk went ahead and called 2020 and said, hey, I'm a fake guest on the show. What a slime ball. The fact that he worked in TV later just shocks me, because one of the hard things of TV is you don't narc your TV off, because again, there's a lot of stuff in TV that people don't know about. We put it in the book, but as I put, TV is the dirtiest business there is. I've never, I was in music, which is a tough business, but TV is just the dirtiest thing you've ever dealt with. When they had the expose on me on 2020, it wasn't good enough that they just said, oh, the shows are fake. They had to have the people lie and say that I had threatened them. And I had said, oh, you have to sign this release. It's not true at all. I never had anybody sign a release. That's what the associate producers were doing. So that wasn't true. I didn't threaten anybody. They all loved going on the show. It was a big fun and games thing. So there wasn't anything where anybody was pressured to go on the show. If they had actually said, I don't want to do it, I said, great, you weren't that good anyway. It was a code word. They'd say, get me somebody, like when the first shows we did was called High Class Call Girls. And they said, get me somebody that says they're a hooker. Get me somebody that says they're a pimp. In fact, on the chyrons, it says he's a hooker. It says he's a pimp. Says she's a hooker. So the whole idea was that they wanted to eat the steak, but they didn't want to know how you butchered the cow. That was really what the true story was. I was not the only one doing the fake shows. Again, it had been done before I was there. It was done after I was there. I was no mastermind. Jerry went on there and they threw me under the bus. They had Jerry say, oh, if they have a producer there that's doing that, I don't want him there anymore. The boss, Richard Dominic, he went on Dateline and said, we don't have a problem with me. Have a rogue producer. So they just went ahead and just ruined my career, threw me to the wind. And that's why I'm glad to be able to tell the story now years later, because I've kept my mouth shut for all these years. And when I saw that documentary, I had been approached, but I didn't want to do it because they didn't want to let me work with the book. Because again, the book is the real story. They didn't want to put that in. They had their own little, BS story they wanted to tell. And now I'm glad, because of the son here, I'm able to tell the real story. And it just feels good to finally tell the truth of what happened, because again, they've been able to blame me for all these years, and they're still trying to say, oh, Norm Lubow, Reverend Bud Green was the only fake producer we ever had. That's bogus. Again, the shows were fake before I was there. They were fake afterwards. The difference was our shows were highly rated. And coincidentally, I was hired when we were number 10. Within 1 year, we were number 1. After the scandal, we went back to being number 10 within 3 months. So you tell me who was the best producer. I have to say, again, not blowing my own horn, but I was the reason that the shows became number 1. So I know we were putting people up at the Motel 6. So there was no fancy hotels by that time. There had been, the very beginning, they had done that. But as they got the more wild guests, they realized that the hotels didn't want them there. So, and the other idea is that we flew them out on an airline that had like a 2-day-old turkey sandwich as the meal. So as I put it in the book, I say, hey, I'd like to see an Oprah producer, put somebody up in Motel 6, give them an old turkey sandwich to come out here, only pay them maybe like $100 or something. There was no big money, and get them to produce like they did on the shows that we did. I don't think it could be done, but we had a certain way of, especially I had a certain way of getting the guests to do what I wanted them to do. And money and everything had nothing to do with it. The only thing we ever gave them was food vouchers, which we called Jerry dollars, but that was it. There was no big money. The only time we ever paid a guest big money, and that wasn't even that much, was $1,000 to Divine Brown, who was the famous hooker. And that actually cemented me getting the full-time job, because they were so impressed that I was able to get her. Because, of course, by that time, Springer had a bunch of shows with hookers and pimps and everything. But the fact that I got the most famous hooker in America really impressed them. And they actually, they treated her like a celebrity before the show. Jerry and the guy in charge, Richard Dominic, both came. Hey, can we meet her before the show and everything? Which I never had them do that for a guest. Again, Jerry wanted to meet him afterwards, maybe to have sex, but they never wanted to meet him beforehand because she was like a celebrity. She was like the only so-called celebrity that we ever really had on the show. It's all ready. I have a 2-page outline. I think they're going to put in the story. Again, it's called The Naked Truth, The Jerry Springer Show Exposed. It talks all about what really went on backstage. It's written by not just by myself, but 3 former producers, Al Bowman, myself, and another one who can't be named because they still work in TV. You realize by me coming forward now, I'll never work in TV again, as well as Al Bowman, because once you put your name out there, you're blackballed. Because again, as I put in the outline, there's a sign on basically every show I've ever worked on. It says, what you see here, what you say here, when you leave here, let it stay here, because they don't want people to know what goes on backstage. And by revealing that, we're breaking a taboo. We're basically breaking the code of silence. And once you've done that, you'll be blackballed from TV. I mean, I was already kind of blackballed because of what happened with the scandal, but now that I'm telling the whole truth with the book, that definitely will end any chance I ever had of working in TV. But that's okay, like I said, because TV is the dirtiest business I ever worked at. It's not like I want to go back and work into that much anyway.